are. Okay, let's another push for Charlie Yehudi Yechezkel Ben Yenta for a refuah shalema for him, and we will also, while we're here, wish Mazel Tov to Marcel Glasky, who is not with us, but has been watching the recordings because his grandson just got engaged in New York. So that's nice. We wish him Mazel Tov. Right. Okay, we are on page 15a and we are making good progress. We are still talking about valuations. I'm going to share the screen with you. Okay, you should have it now. Yeah, got the screen? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So we were talking last week, we're on page 78 of the Steinsaltz, if you're interested, and we're on 15A2 if you're in an art scroll. And we were talking last week at the bottom of page 77 here about the last thing we ended up with was the 10 Kohanim for in the parasha that we have been speaking about, indicating that we needed 10 people to value land. If I just recap, we needed 3 to value movable objects and 10 to value land, one of which, according to Shmuel, needed to be a Kohen. And we asked a question at the end saying, well, what are the rabbis going to do with the fact that there are 10 mentions of Kohanim? And the answer was, we don't know. And they were a bit stuck. So we've established, and it's important that we remember for today's offering, we remember that it's 3 for a movable object and it is 10 for land. Now, what about a person? Can you remember what it was for a person? If you said, I'm going to give the erech, using that word erech for a person, how many judges did we need? It's a trick question.
It's a fixed rate. So
correct. Well done, Michael Kraus. You need no judges for that because it's a fixed amount. And we'll look at the psukim in a minute again to remind ourselves of them. But yes, so the erech, remember we had 2 words for valuation, one for a value. Somebody says, I'm going to give the erech of something, which is the valuation. That means that's the value of a person. And the Torah tells us it's 10 shekels, 20 shekels, 50 shekels, whatever it is, depending on how old the person and what gender they are. And then there is the damim. That was the other expression, the value of a thing, an object, and not a person. And objects are split into 2, movable objects and immovable objects. Immovable objects being land. Land requires an evaluation by 10 judges and movable objects by 3 judges. That's the summary, the bottom line summary of where we've got to at the moment. And now we're going to ask a very interesting question. Bear in mind what we've just said, and bear in mind what Michael Kraus has just correctly remembered. And we are over here at the top of this page here with a little S. The Mishnah, we're going to now move on to the next 3 words of the Mishnah, way back in November 2019. V'adam kayotze bahen. And a person is similar to them. What's that talking about? Well, what is it we're talking about? We were talking about land. See, hakarkaot tisha v'chohen. The last thing we said before where we're up to now was that land required 10 judges, one of whom needed to be a Kohen. So when the Gemarah says, and a person is similar to them, you would imagine that it means similar to what it's just gone on. So therefore, how many judges would you require to value a person? 10, right? Because we've just said, Odom kayotze behen. A person is like land, is like 10, needs 10. But Michael Krauss has got a sour face on because he can't understand that, because he's just told me that there is a fixed value for a person. So what on earth are we talking about? Let's have a look. And the Gemara says, hang on a minute, Adam mi kadosh. Can a person be consecrated in the first place? How can you consecrate a person? How can you consecrate a person to the Beit HaMikdash? You can't. You can't. There's no such thing as consecrating a person. You can say, I give the value of this person to the Beit HaMikdash. But as Michael pointed out, the expression that you would use for that is erech. I give the erech of me, or of you, of somebody, of a person, to the Beit HaMikdash. So the Gemara says, you can't consecrate a person. What is it talking about? Answers the Gemara, or Amar Rabbi Abahu answers, but Omer, this is a case where he says it wrong. Remember, we had this with Rav Gidel a couple of weeks ago. He said the other way round. Rav Gidel said that a person who says, uses the word erech for an object, well, we know what he meant. He meant damim, because there's no such thing as erech with an object. Erech applies to a person. It's a bit like borrowing and lending. Remember, we had that expression, I can't borrow you a fiver. I can lend you a fiver, but I can't borrow you a fiver. And if I said, I'll borrow you a fiver, you know what I mean? That was Rev Gidel's opinion. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, our resident pedant, wasn't happy with that. He says, no, if you say it wrong, it's wrong. It's meaningless. This is the other way round. Rabbi Abahu says that the Gemara now is talking about where a person says, damai alai. He uses the word damim for a person instead of the word erech. Now, if we had Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov sitting here, what would he say? He'd say, forget it. You've said nothing. It means nothing. It's meaningless. But the Gemara says no. It's not meaningless in this particular situation, because there is a situation which we haven't yet come across where you can use the word damim, a valuation for which is normally a thing, about a person. And what it says is, you can say damai alai. The monetary value of this person is incumbent on me, and he brings a brisa to support himself. Detanya, we have learned in a brisa. Ha'omer, a person who says damai alai, my monetary value is incumbent upon me. In other words, the value of me. Not use the word erech. If he uses the word erech, we know how much it is. We just have to need to know what gender he is and how old he is. And we know from the psukim how much. When he says damai alai, and he uses that expression of damim, meaning value in that regard, shamin oto ke'eved hanimkar bashuk. We estimate him as if he is an eved, a servant, available for sale on the open market. Now, what kind of servant are we talking about? What kind of servant are we talking about here? Julia?
We're talking about slaves.
Yeah, what kind of slave? There are two types of slave in the Torah.
One that's sold for 7 years?
No,
No.
the other one.
The other one.
Okay, there are two types of slaves that are sold in the Torah. One is for 7 years, and that is an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave. Okay, a Jewish slave can only be sold for 6 years, and then if he wants to stay, what happens to him?
The earring, they nail him to the door.
He has to get his ear pierced at the door, and then he can stay till when?
Forever.
Another 7 years.
No.
Forever.
What's forever mean, Michael?
To the Yuvel?
Till
till the
Yovel.
Yovel, correct, till the
Jubilee.
next Jubilee. That's right. Which might only be next year, or it might be in 49 years. That's an Eved Ivri. Now, an Eved Ivri, what's the word Ivri mean?
Hebrew.
Hebrew, which means he is a Jewish person. Now, we've already said that a Jewish person, you can't do that. You can't consecrate a Jewish person because he's got those regular values. We know the erech, like Michael said earlier. So the Eved we must be talking about here, what's the name for the other type of Eved? Johnny, it's on the tip of your tongue. You'll kick yourself when I tell you. What's a non-Jewish slave referred to in the Torah as? Anyone? An Eved Kanani. Okay, an Eved Kanani. Remember? So, an Eved Kanani basically means a non-Jewish slave. Doesn't have to be a Canaanite. We'd be hard pushed to find a Canaanite today. But an Eved Kanani means a non-Jewish slave. Now, a non-Jewish slave who can be sold on the open slave market. Now, this is all very un-PC today. If the cancel merchants got hold of this, we would be cancelling the entire Torah and the entire Gemarah, because slavery is big news in the cancel world. All the statues of Rhodes in Oxford and that bloke in Bristol, can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he got toppled into the River Avon because he was a slave marketeer. I'm not going to go into the politics of that, but clearly we're talking in a historical context here.
This is why we say Shlomo Sani Obed, I think.
This is why we say Shlomo Sani Obed. We do not want to be sold on the open market. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So an Eved Kanani can be sold on the open market, or at least at that time could be sold. Let's use the expression could be sold on the open market. And then that Eved Kanani lasts for how long? Same answer you gave before, Michael, only not quite the same answer. Initially, your answer was forever. And then
Till the Yovel.
Well, that's an Eved Ivri until the Yovel.
Right.
Actually, an Eved Kanani really is forever.
Hmm.
Okay, an Eved Kanani does not go free in Yovel. An Eved Kanani is forever, and we will see what forever means in a little while if we get to it today. So, if somebody says, Damai alai, the value of me is incumbent upon me to give to the Bet HaMikdash, and he uses the expression damai, damim, instead of erech, then what you do is you look at him and you estimate how much he would be worth on the slave market. So you'd look at me and you'd think, well, he's not very strong and he's a bit schwach, and he's not used to working because he's sat on his backside in front of a computer all his life. You wouldn't get very much for him. But then you take some big starker, 6 foot, built like that, and you'd get much more money for him on the open slave market. But somebody has to make the decision as to how much we're worth, each of us. Might not want to hear it once they tell us, to be honest, but we need to be valued. And that's what they're talking about here. So a person needs to be valued. Now, we go back to the top of this little section, but Adam kayotze behem, and a person is similar to them, meaning what we just said before, land. So what the Gemarah is doing now, it's saying, if you want to value a person because he used that expression damim, then you have to treat him as if he is land. And how many valuers do we need for land?
10.
10, correct. We need 10 valuers for land. So that's what it means here. And then it spells it out for us. Ve'eved itakash lekarkaot. This word itakash comes, it means to compare. One of the exegetical principles, actually not explicitly, one of Rabbi Yishmael's 13, but it's learned from one of Rabbi Yishmael's 13 principles that we say every morning, is the principle of, David, what's it called? That principle of comparison?
Hekesh.
Hekesh, correct. Hekesh. Hey, kuf, shin. Hekesh means to compare. You compare one thing to another. So you can see that word here, the same root here, in this word here, itakash. Ve'eved itakash lekarkaot. A slave, a servant, the slave is compared to ground. It's a land. Now, the Gemara is now going to ask, how come? What about? We're going to go into this in a bit more detail now. V'adam kayotzu behen mikadosh. Adam mikadosh. Eved itakash lekarkaot. A servant slave is compared to land. Now,
can I just say something? Sorry, but
yes.
we've ended up with the number 10, and we know, having gone over for lengthy periods, that an even number is not a good number.
Kol hakavod. Great question. In fact, your question is asked by. Hang on a minute. Here we go. There is a Tosfot. Julia, you are in good company. The Tosfot in Megillah 23b, which you knew this, of course, because you've learned that already. The Tosfot in Megillah 23b asks exactly your question. And it questions there why we do not require an 11th judge so that the court will have an odd number of judges. The Turei Even, which is one of the another commentator on the Gemara, suggests an explanation. Anybody want to try and guess what the Turei Even says to answer Julia's question from the Tosfot? Why do we not need an 11th judge? I'll tell you what the Turei Even says, and then I'll give you my own explanation, which is different to the Turei Even's. David, you any idea what the Turei Even says on the Tosfot on Megillah 23b? You're muted, David.
None whatsoever.
Shame on you, shame on you. Okay, well, what it says, the Turei Even says, actually, and it's very interesting because I didn't know this, that when we're talking about valuations here, it needs to be unanimous. Wow, indeed, wow. It needs to be unanimous. And so therefore it doesn't matter if it's an even number, because we're not going to have a situation where we need a casting vote. So I don't know where the Turei Even gets that from, because I haven't looked it up. I just saw it in the footnote to in the Art Scroll Gemara. So maybe I'll try and find that for next week and see if I can find that. But that's what the Turei Even says, that it needs to be unanimous. Now, I had a different answer. See what you think of this. You've got 10 valuers. They're all likely to have slightly different valuations. So it's not a question of, 5 say £100 and 5 say £150, and then you need a casting vote, an 11th. One's going to say 100, one's going to say 99, one's going to say 98, one's going to say 101. So somehow or other, you're not going to get into a situation where you actually need a casting vote. What I imagined would happen is you take 10 valuations and you take the average. So you would get, like we do when we ask you to bring in your home blood pressure readings, right? You'll give me 10 readings of your home blood pressure, and I'll add them all up and divide by 10, and I'll get the average of your blood pressure reading. I imagine, I'm not the Turei Even, but if the Turei Even is not right, then a perhaps more logical way of doing it, because it's very unlikely you're going to get 10 people saying exactly the same valuation. I think you're more likely to do this on an average. You take all 10 and you find the average. Yes, Julia?
I'm just thinking that the numbers of members of a jury is 10, and consequently it works in the court system. That though, well, they now accept majorities.
I thought it was 12 and they would
Is it
accept a
12?
majority
Yes,
of 10
yes,
to 2.
yeah. But it's an even number.
Yeah, but they'll accept a majority, but they won't accept a majority of 9 to 3. It's got to be 10 to 2, hasn't it?
Yeah,
At least I think that's the way
so
it is.
maybe they've worked out something on a similar basis.
Yeah, possibly. But I think when you're actually putting a figure on something, there it's a binary choice in the jury, isn't it? It's either guilty or not guilty, or proven or not proven. So here you're putting an actual value on it. I think it would be very difficult to get exact agreement. So I expect that the way it was done was all 10 would give their valuation independent of one another, and then you'd add them all up and divide by 10. And that's probably why they chose 10, because it's easy to divide by 10. If it was 8, it's more difficult. You've got to know your times table. So that's my view, and I'm sticking to it. So, but it's a good question why we don't need an even, we don't need an odd number. So, in what way is a slave compared to land? Okay, why does the Gemarah say a slave is compared to land? Well, I've already told you one reason. One reason is that a slave is forever, and actually you pass that down in inheritance in the same way as you do with land. So that's one reason why slave is compared to land. And if I just skip one paragraph, and we'll come back to it, we go down to this paragraph here now. I'm just going to miss out this one here, these 2 and a bit lines for a minute.
The slave's son becomes a slave as well.
Yes, yes. Oh. Parshat Mishpatim at the beginning,
yeah.
Right? If Marcel was here, he'd be able to tell it is, because it's his bar mitzvah, etc. Okay. When you buy an eved ivri, then if he goes in with a child, he goes out with a child, etc. An eved knani, children all belong to the owner, because the owner gets him married off, and the offspring belong to the owner, and they are passed down in inheritance. So the slave owner, when he dies, the slave does not go free with the death of his owner. He gets passed on to the son. How do we know that from the Torah, by the way? Oh, I've just thought of a great example. How do we know that from the Torah itself? Who was passed on as a slave from one master to another? Joseph. Joseph was passed to a slave. Jeffrey is saying he was sold on. What my question is really different. My question is, who in the Torah was passed on to the son when the father passed away? It's a bit obtuse. Yes, Jeffrey, unmute yourself and tell us.
Was it Abraham's servant who?
I think so, yes. Eliezer, I'm thinking of. Now, I said it's a bit obtuse, and David's going to object. I can see he's got an objecting face on there. And I'll tell you why he's going to object in a minute, because it's not quite clear what I'm saying. I'm thinking of Eliezer because although Abraham was still alive at the time, how does Eliezer refer to Yitzchak, the son of Eliezer, the son of Abraham? He refers to him as, yes, Julia, he refers to him as Adoni, my master. When Rivka comes for the first time from her father and brother's house, and she arrives with Eliezer back into Beersheba, and she sees Yitzchak davening away in the field, and she says, "Who's this?" And he says, Eliezer says to her, "That is my master." And he refers to Yitzchak as his master. Now you'll tell me, well, Avram was still alive, and therefore that doesn't count. And you're right. But I think that indicates, at least it's what we call an asmachta. It's a support for my view that there is in the Torah itself an example of a slave or an eved being passed on to the next generation. We also see it with Devorah. Who was Devorah in the Torah? There's two Devorahs. Who was the first Devorah in the Torah? Not in Tanakh, in the Torah itself. Who was the first Devorah? David?
The Meineket Rivka.
Yes, the Meineket Rivka, the wet nurse, the wet nurse of Rivka. Now, how do we know that the wet nurse of Rivka was passed on to the next generation of people? Because was it last week, Cedra, that she dies?
Becca.
She died, I think, in last week's Cedra, or the week before, correct? Which one is it, David?
Last week.
Last week's Cedra. She dies, but she's not there with Rivka. She's there with Yaakov when she dies. So Rivka, she's still, and she's referred to as Devorah Meineket Rivka. So there's another example of a servant, in this occasion, a wet nurse, being passed on to the next generation. So so an Eved Kanani.
How do we know that Rivka is dead?
Well, she's not with Yaakov, is she?
Yeah, but neither is Yitzchak.
That's true. She might not be alive. She might not be dead. You're right.
There's no reference. There's no direct reference in the Torah to her death.
No, you're right. You're right. But one way or another, she's been passed on to Yaakov. No, you're not happy?
No. Well, it poses another question. What's that story even doing in the context of last week's parsha? But okay, let's move on.
Big question, because it's like plonked there in the middle. Some of them are Farshman. I think Rashi actually says, could be wrong, it might not be Rashi, says that it's plonked there to tell us that this is about hakarat hatov. It's about gratitude, and that because this lady Dvorah had looked after Rivka when she was a baby, then the family continued to look after her in her old age. And it's there to tell us, to teach us a lesson about looking after people when they have been good to you, and hakarat hatov, demonstrating gratitude. Okay, so we digress. But anyway, the fact is, it is a halacha that the Eved Kanani is passed on in inheritance. And in that regard, it is like land, okay? Land is passed on in inheritance. But I just want to go on to this paragraph here. As I said, I'm missing this paragraph out, but I'm coming back to it, don't worry. Tashma, come and listen. Hamakdish et avdo, ein mo'alin bo. Somebody who consecrates his slave is now consecrated to the Bet HaMikdash. Now, you know, don't you, because we've learnt it, that anything that is consecrated to the Bet HaMikdash, you're not allowed to use for your own personal use. So if you consecrate the value of your lawnmower to the Bet HaMikdash, and you haven't redeemed it, in other words, you haven't said, got your three valuers in, said, how much is this thing worth? I want to redeem it, and paid your money, then that lawnmower is holy. It's Kodesh. It belongs to the Bet HaMikdash. And if you cut your grass with it, we learnt it last week, you have to bring a korban and you get a fine. Okay? It's a serious business. However, if you do that with a slave, you are not liable for punishment. It doesn't mean you're allowed to do it. It's called potter aval osa. It's you're free of the fine. You don't get the fine, but you're not allowed to do it. Ein mo'alin bo. Mo'alin means you don't get you're not liable for the punishment for this me'ilah. And the reason for that is because a person is like land. The same thing goes for land. If you consecrate land and you use it for your own benefit, although you're not allowed to do that, you don't get the punishment of me'ilah. The punishment of me'ilah, meaning the fine and the need to bring a sin offering, only applies if you misuse objects, movable objects that have been consecrated to the Bet HaMikdash, like a lawnmower. Don't ask me why I thought of a lawnmower, but anyway. And there's another example of how an eved, a servant or a slave, is compared to land. And so if we go back up to our paragraph over here, eved itakash lekarkaot, a slave is compared to land in those two ways. Number one way is that he is passed on in inheritance, and number two way in that he is not. You're not liable for a punishment for me'ilah if you misuse him, if you've consecrated him. So the Gemara says the slave is compared to land, and land needs 10 judges. And therefore, if you were to say the value of me is, I consecrate the value of me or any other person using the expression damim as opposed to erech, then you get 10 judges because you're like land, 10 judges, either unanimous verdict according to the Turei Even or an average according to Lieberman, and you then get the value of that, and you have to give that to the Bet HaMikdash because he is like land. Now, let's go back to the paragraph that I missed out, because the Rabbi Avin asks a very interesting question. Ba'e Rabbi Avin. Rabbi Avin questions. Again, I just remind you of the origin of this word, or a link to this word ba'e, which we have here as a question. Ba'ayah in modern Hebrew is a problem. So Rabbi Avin raises a problem. Ba'e Rabbi Avin. Rabbi Avin brings a ba'ayah. He brings a problem to what we've just said. In other words, he questions. So that's the origin of that word. Steyar ha'omed ligzoz. Hair which is ready to be cut. Bekama. How many judges does it need to value the hair which is about to be cut? What is the basis of Rabbi Avin's question here? Explain to me what Rabbi Avin is asking here. What's his problem? Any suggestions?
It's not a full person, it's a part of a person.
Correct. That's the question. Is hair which is still attached? Obviously, once you've cut the hair becomes an object. There's no question that becomes a movable object. But hair which is fitting to be cut, in other words, it's long enough to be cut, but it hasn't yet been cut, Rabbi Avin suggests maybe it's already considered to be not a whole person, as it's part of a person, or maybe it's still attached and therefore it's still a person or part of a person, and you need 10 because a person needs 10 and an object needs 3. So his question is, what is the status of this hair which is about to be shorn? Well, the first question is, why would you think when you go there, the barbers or the hairdressers, that your hair is worth anything? It just goes on the floor and gets swept up and thrown away. So of course, the answer is that hair, human hair, is very valuable. Have a look at this. Has anybody heard of Zichron Menachem? Yes. Avril, unmute yourself and tell us what Zichron Menachem is.
It's a tzedakah where they make wigs for children.
It is.
There's
Correct. Have a look at
lots of
this.
children grow their hair and have the plaits cut and send it.
Absolutely. Here we go. This is Zichron Menachem is a charity which supports kids with cancer. And one of the things that they do is that they get hair and they get people to donate their hair. My wife has done it, I think, twice. My daughter's done it, I think, 3 times. You get to a certain length and then you plait it and they cut the plait off and then you send them the hair and they use it to make wigs for kids who've lost their hair because of their cancer treatment. Here it is. And you braid it. It's a whole big business here, and it's wonderful. And here's little Shilat, who's written here, I was sad without my beautiful hair. Some kids thought I was a boy. One kid told me he'd never seen a bald girl, and that insulted me. I love to wear my hair in plaits or in a ponytail. I love to feel normal. So this is a great charity. If you want to donate your hair, or if you want to donate money to this wonderful charity, it's called Zichron Menachem, thoroughly to be recommended. And as you can see from the flags across here, there's all sorts of places where you can, you donate it in any of these countries. So Zichron Menachem donates hair. And our Gemarah, let's go back to the Gemarah. Our Gemarah is asking the question, what about this hair? What status does it have whilst it's still attached? Kegazuz dami, is it considered like, as if gazuz, it's already been cut off, because it's fitting and ready to be cut? Is it considered already as if it were cut? And then you would need how many? Shlosha, 3. Or kimechubar, it is considered as if it is like it is attached. Dummy, considered. What word can you see in that word there, mechubar, which means attached? What modern Hebrew word can you see there?
Chosen, no?
Chosen chosen is bachor. It's the same words, only in a different order. Yes, I suppose, yes, if you're chosen to be something, you are attached to it. Yeah, I'll buy that, I suppose. I'm thinking of a much more obvious one with the words, the letters in the right order.
Chevra, friend.
Yes, well done, Johnny. Chaver, friend,
Chaver.
or chevra, which means society, community. What is a friend? Friend is somebody who's attached to you, or you're attached to him or her. So yeah, a chaver is somebody who is mechubar, attached to you. So is this hair considered to be as if it's already shorn and you need 3, or as if it's still attached and then you would need asara, 10, because it's part of a person, and we've already just proved that a person is like land. So why did I miss that out? Because I wanted to show you the next bit, which is the answer to his question, but I wanted to show you how an eved, a servant, is compared to karka in the first place. So now we'll go back and read this again in its right context. So the Gemarah says, Hamakdish et avdo, somebody who consecrates his servant, ein mo'alim bo, he does not get punished if he does me'ila, if he uses him incorrectly. In other words, he uses it for his own benefit when he's been consecrated to the temple. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, mo'alin bis'aro, However, if you use his hair incorrectly, in other words, you have consecrated this servant and you use his hair for an incorrect purpose, then you do have to pay the fine and you do have to bring the sin offering, which would tell us what? It would tell us that the hair is as if it's been cut off, because if it's as if it was still connected, then you wouldn't be liable for the fine, because we've just said using a slave is not considered liable. You're not liable. So according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, we would be able to understand that the answer to Rabbi Avin's question is that hair is not hair that's ready to be grown. Oh, sorry, is grown, ready to be cut, is not considered still attached. It's considered as if we've already taken it off, because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel makes you liable if you use it incorrectly. Julia, you've got a puzzled look. What's your problem?
I've got 2 points really. One, I think hair is dead material. I don't think it's living. The other is that if you are treating it separately, then you actually, the value is the value of the person plus the value of the hair.
That's a good question. Okay, let's take the second question first. If you were one of our 10 valuers, you would come along and say, well, Fred, well, won't use me because I haven't got any hair that's long enough to be of any use to anybody. I haven't got enough hair to be useful to me, never mind anybody to make a wig with it. So you'll take somebody like you, Julia, who's got good long hair, and I'm one of the valuers, and I come along and I say, well, Julia's worth on the open slave market, she's worth £100, but her hair is worth another tenner if I cut it, because I can flog that separately and I can get another £10. So you're right. My valuation of you is £110. Now, another valuer might come along and say, no, I don't think that's the case. Her hair's not very good. Wouldn't make much of a wig. So I'm just going to value her at 100. And that's why you need 10 valuers or 3 valuers or however many we decide you need, because people will have different opinions. But you're absolutely right. That would take into account the entire valuation. Now, your question raises another question. Do we now need 10 valuers to value Julia and a different 3 to value the hair? Because the hair is considered separate. We've just said that according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So the question is, can 3 of the 10 act as the valuers of the hair, or do we need a separate 3? In which case we'd need 13. We know what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov would say, don't we? He would definitely want another 3. What an interesting question. Very, very interesting. Okay. The first part was that hair is dead material. I'm not sure that's true. If it was dead, it wouldn't grow. The follicle is not dead. But the actual hair that you're cutting off, well, it doesn't have any sensory nerves. Otherwise, you'd feel pain when you had your hair cut. I'm not sure technically whether hair is dead material or not. I'd have to think about that. But it can't be. The follicle's definitely not dead, although, you know, mine are. So not sure. But the second question is a very, very good point. Okay, so Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that hair is separate, and I will prove it to you because, and he says, "V'kaim alon," and we establish or we maintain the bisaro ha'omed ligzuz pligi. That is what they are arguing about. When Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that if you are use the hair incorrectly, he's not talking about hair that's already cut. How do we know that? How do we know that? How do we know Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is not talking about hair that's already cut? Because it's obvious. It's obvious. Why would Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel come along and say the blindingly obvious? We've already established that an object, it's in the Mishnah clearly, an object, a movable object, is valued by 3 judges, right? So that means that hair that is cut off is judged by 3, is valued by 3 judges. If it's valued by 3 judges, then it's an object. If it's an object, then you will be liable for the fine if you use it incorrectly. We don't need Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel in another brisa to come and say that. It's obvious. So the Gemara says he must be talking about a situation where we're not sure, because we are sure that once it's cut, it's cut. So v'kaim alon, and we maintain, we establish, we think, we are sure that what he's arguing with the first opinion, which we don't actually see, we only see his opinion. Obviously, there is a previous opinion that says it's not the case. This discussion between Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and this secret Tanakama is about hair omeid ligzuz, which is ready to cut. Something which is omeid ligzuz means it's ready for it, about to. It's literally from the word to stand. Okay, omeid means to stand. Yeah, Amidah is the prayer that we stand in. Yeah, that's why it's called the Amidah, because we stand in it. What is an amud in a building?
Is this a station area?
Emda. That's the same word. Emda. It's the root of the same word. Emda is a station. Yes, because you stand there and you do what you're doing. And when you go into the post office, that's called an emda. You're quite right. An amud in a building is what? Jeffrey, this is your patch here. What's an amud? Have a guess. You're muted.
Must be a column. A column, is it? A column?
Yeah, a column or a pillar.
Yeah.
Something which supports the roof, right? It's because it stands up. It makes the building stand up. It's the same word. So an amud is a pillar. Now, we will all have known the expression davening for an amud. What does that mean? We know what davening means, praying. What's the word for mean? It doesn't mean for in English. It means it's a Yiddish expression, this. Davening for an amud does not mean davening for in English. What's the word for mean in Yiddish?
At. In
front of or at, yes.
Yes.
So davening in front of the amud.
Yeah.
What's the amud? The
You
amud
stand
is the
where
place
you
where you
daven
stand,
from.
where the chazan stands. It's the same word. It's the same root. Okay? So ha'omeid ligzos means hair which is standing ready to be cut. So somebody who is omeid lehitchaten means he's ready to get married. Okay, so omeid in this context means it's ready. It's standing there ready and waiting. So we've seen a lot of etymology here from that word. Amud, omud, emda. This is the beauty of the Hebrew language, that's why there are so few roots, because you get this one root and it means so many different things. I think Philip Lara once told me that there are, I think he said 30,000 words in Hebrew and 600,000 words in English. I don't remember the numbers, but the differential was huge. And that's because Hebrew uses this root system. For example, the word derech, which means way. Yeah, derech means way. A madrich is a guide who shows you the way. A midracha is a pavement, because that is the way you walk on. Okay, midracha is a pavement. Madrich is a guide. or madricha is a female guide. Okay, so yes, we've established here that this must be Rebbe Shimon Gamliel's discussion, must be about hair that's still attached, because he wouldn't say the blindingly obvious that it was already cut, you needed, you weren't mo'il, because you would be. Okay, so he says you're not mo'il if it's still attached. Shma mina, learn from here that this question of whether hair is viewed as shorn or not yet shorn has already been discussed by previous Tanaim. Rabbi Avin's question, basically what the Gemarah is saying is, Rabbi Avin's question is a bit like Julia. It wasn't an original question. He might have thought of it, but somebody had thought of that question before, and that was this Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Julia thought of that question that the Tosfos in Megillah had already thought of, even though Julia thought of it independently. Here, Rabbi Avin probably thought of it independently, but the Gemarah is saying we already have a precedent on that question. And then it goes on to say, you know what? There's another precedent. There's another precedent. And here we go. We're over here now. Neymar, let us say, Hane Tana'e, Ke Hane Tana'e. These Tana'im who are arguing about this case, i.e. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and his unseen opponent, are Ke, like Hane Tana'e. These Tana'im that I'm going to tell you about now. So the Gemarah is now bringing us another discussion between Tana'im, which parallels Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and his opponent's argument, and Rabbi Avin's discussion. So this is a third lot of people asking the same type of question. And here they are. We've just got a few minutes more. I need to stop on time because I've got something on at past. But we'll just do a few more lines. Ditnan, we've learnt in a Mishnah, this time not a Breita. A Mishnah, if you want to see where it is, it's in Shavuot. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, Yesh Dvarim Shehein Kakarka Ve'enan Kakarka. There are certain things that are similar to land in some respects and are dissimilar to land in other respects. And he's going to tell them what they are. Ketzad, how so? Or go on then, tell us. Ketzad, how is that? I always remember the translation of Ketzad as a kid, because my Rebbes always used to translate Ketzad as how is that? And since my main Gemarah Rebbe came from, I don't know where was Schmag from, Johnny? Was he from Germany? Or was he from Austria?
Most probably.
Germany, I think. He used to say, Ketzad, how's that? And I always used to think of cricket. I always remembered Ketzad because Johnny and I had the same Gemarah Rebbe who spoke with rather a strong Germanic accent. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. Ketzad, how is that? What are you talking about? In what way is something like land in some respect and not like land in other respects? Eser gefanim su'unot masarti lacha. Somebody comes along and says, I deposited with you 10 vines full of grapes, laden with grapes. Okay? V'hala omer, and the other person says back to him, no, einan ela chamesh. You only deposited 5 with me, not 10. He's come back, he's come for his 10 vines, right? Or the value of his 10 vines. I deposited these with you either for safekeeping or I paid you to look after them, whatever the case is. I want them back now. And he says, what are you talking about? You only gave me 5, not 10. Rabbi Meir Mechayev. Rabbi Meir says he is obligated, and I'll tell you what he's obligated in a minute. V'chachamim omrim, and the Chachamim, Rabbi Meir's opponents, the sages, say, Kol hamechubar lekarka, harei hu kakarka. Anything that is attached to the land is like land. Okay, what is it talking about here? Well, if you look on the right side in the translation, it will tell you how on earth you are meant to know this without learning this with somebody who already knows. I do not know, because without this explanation from Rav Steinsaltz or the Gemarah or a teacher, you'd have no idea what they were talking about. Here, when Rebbe Meir says he's obligated, what it means is he's obligated to take an oath. Now, there is a halacha which says that if a person has a claim against another person, and the second person, the person against whom the claim is, admits partially. So our case here is this guy comes along and says, you owe me for 10 vines full of grapes. And the guy says, no, I don't. I only owe you for 5. That's our case here, right? He's admitted that he owes for 5, but he's not admitted the whole debt. Somebody comes along and says, I lent you £100. I want it back. He says, no, you didn't. You lent me 20, 50, 70, whatever it is. I'll give you the 50 or whatever it is that you lent me. I'm not giving you 100. You never lent me 100. You only lent me 50. That is called in halakha. David, do you know what that's called in halakha? Sure you do.
Modeh b'miktzas. Yes,
it's called modeh b'miktzas, or if we're going to say it in our super modern pronunciation, modeh b'miktzat. And let's look at those words. Modeh. What does modeh mean? You've all said it this morning when you open your eyes. Well, the ladies will have said modah.
Thank you.
Yes, you thank you, or you admit. Modeh is modim anachnu lach, means we thank you. It also means we admit to you. So if you are modeh to something, you either thank them, ani modeh lecha means I thank you, but it also means I admit. So modeh, you admit, b'miktzat. What's ktzat in Hebrew? You all know
a little
that.
bit.
A little bit. So modeh b'miktzas, said correctly, modeh b'miktzat means that you admit to a little bit of the loan or the debt. Okay, modeh b'miktzat, you admit to a little bit of the loan. So in our case here, he's admitted to 5 out of the 10 vines. That's modeh b'miktzat. Rabbi Meir says, no, before I get to Rabbi Meir, the halacha is that somebody who denies an entire debt does not have to make an oath that he doesn't own it, that he doesn't owe it. Okay, it can go to court and it has to, and the court will decide whether he owes it or not. But somebody who is modeh b'miktzas, somebody who admits partial partial debt, the halacha is that he gives the partial amount. So in our case, he'd give the money for the 5 vines, and he would have to make an oath to swear that he didn't owe the rest. Let's use a monetary thing, not our vines, because our vines are a separate case. Our case, the case that we're talking about, modeh b'miktzas, somebody comes and says, you owe me £100. And he says, no, I don't, I owe you 50. The halacha is you give him the 50 and you make an oath to say, I swear, as a proper oath with God's name, etc., that I only owe you 50 and I do not owe you the other 50. That's the halacha. When we're talking about grapevines, there's the potential different situation. Why? Because the oath of modeh b'miktzas does not apply to land. It only applies to movable objects. Somebody comes along and says, you owe me 2 acres of field, and you say, no, I only owe you 1 acre. That halacha of making an oath for modeh b'miktzas does not apply to land. It's one of the differentiations between land and movables. We've seen that there are different differentials between land and movables, one of which is how many judges you need for valuation. The same thing is with an oath. For land, modeba miktzat, somebody who admits to a partial debt, does not make the oath. So in our case, we've got vines. Are these vines, which are full of grapes, considered to be attached to the ground, in which case you would not need to make an oath in our case? Or are they considered separate from the ground, in which case you would need to make an oath if you were modef lemiktas? Rabbi Meir says you have to make an oath, which means that he holds that they are not land, they are separate from the land. And you'll see why next week, Julia. And the Chachamim say, no, it's attached to the land, it's land. Okay, now what we're talking about, I'll just give you a quick heads up, is we're talking about vines where the grapes are ready to be picked. And you can see the parallel with the hair that's ready to be cut. We'll go into it next week, into detail of what these vines are talking about, and the grapes, whether they're considered, when they're considered ready to be picked, are they considered picked or not, and why? Very interesting things. So let's just summarize what we've done today. We said that a person can be made holy if you use this funny expression damim, not use the right expression erech. If you use erech, it's a fixed amount. If you use damim, it is the amount that you would get on the open market as a slave. A slave is considered like land. We proved that by the fact that a slave is, it does not, if you use a slave incorrectly, you do not have to pay a fine and bring a korban. And then we brought a question of Rebbe Avin, what about the hair of a slave that's ready to be cut? Is that valued separately, or is it part of the person? And then we've proved so far that this is an old argument. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and his unseen opponent said, have that discussion, similar discussion. And now Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim are having a similar discussion, couched in different terms, with grape-laden vines. And on the back of that, we have learnt lots of etymology of amud, of modeh, of ketzat, and we've also learned the halacha that if you admit to a partial debt with a movable object, i.e. anything that isn't considered to be land, then you give what you say you own and you make an oath on the rest. If it's land, you don't make the oath. Okay, any questions on that lot? We did a lot today, didn't we?
These vines you're talking about, was it a bunch of grapes, or was it actually attached to the ground?
Okay, that's what we will learn next week, Johnny.
I would just say that the English land law of fixtures and fittings sounds very pertinent here.
Yes, we will. We'll bone up on them for next week, Julia, and we can compare them.
Thank you. Today about.
Any
Thanks,
questions? Johnny. Okay, let's stop the recording, and then